Hello Aqua friends, welcome to my channel. My name is Nicole and today I have an abstract, beautiful painting that we're going to do. I started thinking about geodes and how fun it would be to do a pattern that sort of reminds me of geode rocks and a palette of just a couple of simple blues. And so I'm showing you my process, my thought process here for doing some test paintings before I do my big painting. I started off by splashing the background with some reflective sparkly silver, and now I'm doing the crust of the geoid in indigo blue, and I do like to have the very edges darker. So I basically just penciled in some shapes that I thought would make an interesting composition. Instead of showing the whole geode, it's like a couple of different rocks together. So once I do the crust of each rock, I'm moving on to wet the inside and then dropping in the color. So I kind of had in my mind that there's a lot of different textures in geodes, and so I was going to try some different textural techniques by dropping in the paint like I'm doing now and just dabbing in the indigo. Here I'm using Peruvian blue and dabbing in darker Peruvian blue. Like I said, it gives it this little textural effect. In this one, I'm making tiny little blooms by dropping in water to an already area that is drying, and it makes these really neat cauliflower effects. I do want contrast, and I am going to have some darker blues. Here I'm dropping in salt because salt would be a neat textural effect and kind of really represent those sort of crystallized structure of a geode. So when you have an idea, it's very helpful to do these little mini paintings to test out your concept and to see how you want to go about it. Here I am splashing on water, and that gives me another textural effect. Coming in with some very dark indigo for some contrast. Now notice in this example, I am wetting one area, I'm working on it, letting that dry, and then I'll go back in when it's dry enough for me to put another color right beside the one I just did. That way I don't have to worry about the colors bleeding into one another and making textural effects when I don't want them. So here I am dropping in water again. It kind of makes a really cool pattern. As you can see, it's kind of fun. This is a fantastic project for beginners because anybody can do it. In this other example, I'm using a sponge, a wet sponge, little textural effects with a stencil. And there are many lines in a geode, and so I'm using a script liner brush to draw in many lines. I also wanted a very crisp edge to my rocks, and so I thought I would try using a marker or a ballpoint pen. I'm drawing in the lines now where I want silver. So I've been using a lot of silver leaf and gold leaf in paintings and playing around with that, and I love it. So this is the glue that I'm using for my silver leaf. If you don't have silver leaf, you can use silver ink, or you can use silver markers, silver pens. There's lots of different options, or you don't need to add the silver at all if you don't want to. So here I go with the silver leaf. I'm a little bit of a bling bling girl. I do like a sparkle here and there, and I thought that it would add some really cool, interesting effects here to my composition. And I absolutely love how this silver leaf turned out. So I'm using just a kind of a stiff brush to get the gold leaf off and scrub all the flakes away, and then you're just left with this beautiful pattern. So in my next thought process, I thought about doing a composition where I had no white space. And so it's just squiggly lines, and it's just basically the pattern of a geode. And I'm doing it all wet on wet and adding my texture to the whole paper. So as my paper dries and I keep adding squiggly lines, they will not spread as much. So some will be more intense, they won't be as thicker. And I just keep going and adding these lines. Now for a little bit of sparkle, I do have silver sparkly paint that I splattered on there. With some thick markers, I'm adding my squiggly lines. And I also have a gel pen for some thinner lines. So this is another way of doing it. It did turn out quite nice. I really love how this one's darker and it's more of a contrast. It's more popping in your face, if you will. And I really like those thick white lines I made, and I decided that's where I wanted my silver foil to be. So I'm adding my glue, and now I'm going to go ahead and add my silver leaf, and we will see here how this one comes out. So as you can see, it's more of a contrast because I do have darker colors, and so that silver really pops against my darker blues. And it's quite beautiful. You guys will have to let me know what your favorite is. I decided to take what I learned from doing my little sketches and kind of combining a few things. I do like the white negative space between the rocks, and so I decided to do my rocks in one go, wet on wet, but have that white space in between the rocks. I opted for no sparkly paint, and I'm just going to use the clean lines of the silver leaf when I get to the end of the painting. So I'm using indigo blue again and Prussian blue. It's basically the only two blues that I'm using for this painting. And while everything's wet, I want to continue to drop in those colors and let them bleed together. Continue with those textural effects. I will use the salt. I will drop in water to make blooms, and I will also drop in paint to make those little patterns. Adding my salt. Now, while I'm waiting for that one to dry, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cover my next large geode with fresh water. Now I am using a hacky brush. I have had other hacky brushes in the past that shed a ton, and it's a real pain in the butt, but these hacky brushes that I bought, they're a little bit more expensive, but completely worth it. They don't shed very much at all, and they hold a lot of water and allow you to get all your colors down and have your paper remain nice and moist so that everything bleeds together nicely. Same palette, putting down those colors, my indigo, my Prussian blue. So some of the brushes that I'm using for this size paper, I am using a lot of natural bristle brushes just because they do hold a lot of water, allow me to paint faster and longer because they hold a lot of paint. Adding some salt. I'm making tiny little blooms by putting in little drops of water, and you can see it makes this beautiful texture. Okay, on to the last part of the composition. Working in the same manner, wetting everything really good first. Notice I really go over it well so that I have a lot of time. The edges, the crust, if you will, of these rocks are very jaggedy, and there's lots of little nooks and crannies, and so that part slows me down. I want to make sure I have enough time to drop in those colors. I also like the crust being darker, especially along the edges. A little bit of salt. So I'm varying up my colors. I'm using just two, but I could also mix the two together. Some could be more saturated, more paint, less water, so that I have a variety of values in my abstract painting. Some salt. Now you're going to let that whole thing dry. And on my next layer, I'm going to be adding the thin lines with my script liner brush. I'm going to have that nice repetition of lines and increasing the value of the crust of the rock. I really do like that really dark, sharp contrast against the white background. So what I do with one, I'm going to continue to do the same effects to all of my geodes so that it's a nice balanced composition. Some other brushes that I'm using are calligraphy brushes and mop brushes. I have a very small detail brush to do the raggedy edges of the rocks here. Now I'm going to work one little section at a time. This is a very small, I think it's a 0 brush, and I want that really dark, crisp edge, but I also want to wet the edge and add more of the indigo, and it's going to bleed where the water is, and so it will transition nicely with the paint that I already have there. So I'm going to continue that with all of my edges, which I did, and now working on the inside edge of the geode, I'm going to add that indigo and do the same sort of thing where it kind of bleeds into the water. So it's a wet on wet line. I can also add my other darker lines. So I'm going to do the same thing to the other rocks. So once your painting dries, you can lightly pencil in where you want the silver to be, and I did that with a regular pencil, and now I'm covering it with the glue that I need for my silver leaf. I do love the silver in the white areas as well as on the rocks. Okay, so you know this part by now, adding the silver leaf, and then it's so fun watching the big reveal as you add the pieces and then brush it away with a brush. But you guys have watched me do this twice before, so let me speed this up for you and show you the end result. All right, scrubbing away here at the silver leaf, and you're left with these beautiful lines. Now, just doing the final little dusting. This is an Arches block that I've used to paint on, so I'm just releasing the paper. I used 140-pound paper. It's cold press. And that is the end result. It's so pretty. I hope you guys give this a try. It's so much fun. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.